The First Century Diaries by Gene Edwards, the Silas Diary, Chapter 15. The two church planters were in Antioch of Pisidia for 4 months. That is not long. Remember, most of the holy ones in the ecclesia were slaves. There were 1 or 2 Greeks and Jews and a few soldiers. There were no city leaders or persons of influence. All the God-fearers who heard Paul that first day were now strong believers, and they no longer attended the synagogue. Having been part of the body of Christ and tasted his freedom, and having become one with others in the gathering, they could not stand the thought of going back to the synagogue. By the time the 2 apostles left Pisidia, there were about 100 adults in the ecclesia. To the rest of the city, they probably seemed like thousands because of their exuberance and their unique way of life. Of that 100, only 6 men could read, and only one of the 6 could write. Remember this as you consider how brief a time these 2 men were in Pisidia to help the ecclesia there. These new believers had no building, no ritual, no priest-like leaders, no leaders at all, in fact. This was the only religion whose adherents met in homes. And those dear believers had no holy writings, Jewish or Christian. When the 2 apostles left, there was nothing to read. What ended Paul and Barnabas' presence in Pisidia? Jacob, the ruler of the synagogue, despised Paul. He ran it against him constantly. This was of little concern to anyone until one morning when the 3 unbelieving Hebrews crept into an early morning gathering. They came, watched, and then believed. They had never seen anything like this group that evidenced such joy, singing, sharing, interpreting, hugging, loving, and then more sharing. All of this centered around Jesus Christ, each person telling how they had experienced him that day. All this won the hearts of the 3 Hebrews. When Jacob heard of the conversion of these Jews, he was outraged. He knew exactly what he would do to stop these people. He would turn the local Romans against them. Roman protection, Roman justice, Roman fairness was only for Romans, their soldiers, the wealthy, and the local leaders whom they appointed. Slaves and freedmen were never included in Roman justice, nor were the city leaders concerned about extending justice or protection to such people. Jacob dared not take his contention directly to the Roman rulers, however. He didn't even go directly to the leaders of the city. He went to their wives, who were influential in the cult of the god men. Using his position as a religious leader in the community, Jacob went to the leading women and began telling them of the danger Paul posed to the city. He presented Paul's teachings as undermining the authority of the local god, which was true, but he also twisted Paul's words to make them sound dangerous to the stability and welfare of the larger community. The women were alarmed on both accounts. They didn't want their own influence as religious leaders reduced, and they were fearful about what the Roman rulers might do if the leadership of the community was undermined. These women, therefore, took Jacob's deceiving words to their husbands. Problems in local government make Roman rulers unhappy. This problem would be dealt with swiftly. While Barnabas sat working in the marketplace one day, guards came, seized him, and dragged him before the city fathers. Other soldiers searched the marketplace for Paul. The city officials had already gathered in the square in front of the governing hall, awaiting the arrival of the 2 troublemakers. Barnabas knew the gravity of the situation as soon as he arrived in the square. He had heard that some of the influential women were complaining about the new religion, but he was surprised to see the city's magistrate sitting in council. Even more disturbing was the sight of 2 lictors standing on either side of the magistrate. Lictors, representing the power of Rome, were men who beat people with rods. At their feet lay the fasces, an ancient symbol of Roman authority. It was a bundle of wooden rods bound tightly around the handle of an axe, leaving the axe head extended out between the rods. The local government was not going to risk a religious disturbance in their city, so they had enlisted the assistance of the Roman rulers. It was a foregone conclusion that Paul and Barnabas would be beaten. The proceedings began. The entire square was full of eager onlookers. "I was told there were 2 of them," said the magistrate. "Where's the other one?" "He is still being sought." "You, what is your name?" "Barnabas." "A Jew?" "I am." "You are teaching a new and foreign religion. That is prohibited." "But you will leave this city immediately. You will take your God with you. You are banished from this city forever. Never return. But," and then the magistrate nodded to the lictors. They reached down and began unbinding the fasces, each searching for the strongest of the rods. A soldier grabbed Barnabas's arm and pulled him over a waist-high whipping pillar. It was stained with the blood of past victims of such beatings. At that moment, a squad of soldiers found Paul, who had been trimming sheepskin in another area of the market. The soldiers grabbed Paul and half-dragged him to the square. Paul caught sight of Barnabas just as the lictors prepared to beat him. He reached up to the diptych hanging around his neck and pushed it down into his toga. That diptych could have spared Paul, a citizen of Rome, such a beating, but Paul was not going to stand his rights to be spared a beating already being administered to Barnabas. One lictor had taken his place on one side of Barnabas, the other lictor on the other side. Together they ripped off Barnabas's shirt. One lictor raised his rod above his head and brought it down hard on Barnabas's back. The crowd squealed with delight. The other lictor followed with an equally hard stroke. The lictors quickly established a rhythm to striking their victim. The rods were whistling through the air with each blow. Barnabas's back was soon red from waist to neck. Just before the rods broke his skin, the beating ended. The soldiers released his arms, and Barnabas crumbled to the pavement, almost unconscious. "We have the other one." "Good. Continue." Paul was dragged forward and pulled over the same marble column. On what charge?" Paul asked loudly. "Your companion will tell you when he finds his tongue," barked the magistrate. The crowd roared with laughter. One lictor tore off Paul's shirt. There was a moment of silence as the lictor and the crowd caught sight of Paul's gnarled back. The magistrate leaned forward. A sound of delight rose from the crowd. "The Jews don't like you either, do they?" said the magistrate. With fiendish glee in their eyes, the lictors reached for their rods, determined to give Paul a beating no Jewish whip could match. The first lictor slammed his rod down on Paul's back with all his might. The second lictor hit him with a vengeance. Nor did they stop when his back turned red. Soon a mist of Paul's blood filled the air and splattered on the lictors' faces. They stopped only when Paul slumped forward unconscious. Years later, Paul told me that he almost cried out, "Civis Romanus sum," before he fainted. Remember where he says, 3 times I was beaten with rods. Paul's body crumpled to the pavement. "Get him out of here," ordered the magistrate. The soldiers nodded, but just before they dragged him away, one of the brothers, himself a soldier, stepped forward and did the most courageous thing. Forcing his way past the other soldiers, he knelt down and picked Paul up in his arms, glared defiantly at the soldiers, the magistrate, and the crowd, and then carried Paul to Jupiter's home. A few minutes later, Barnabas staggered into the same house. Late that night, something incredible began to unfold.